All right, so we were able to create this country string here, and we were able to also print it out, and we see here says Mozambique. Okay, that's really good. Now there's a little interesting fact here. So what are we doing here? We said var country, and we set it to something. So we created the variable and we set it to something. But in programming, there are times when we just want to create that variable and set it to nothing in the beginning so that we have the flexibility at a later time to set it to something. That's very common. Because when we say var and say country, we're just saying this is just going to be a variable. The type of this variable is of any type. Okay, let's go back a little bit here, talk about what is this type thing that Paulo is talking about. Okay, type. I have no idea. Well, if you look at variables as we discussed earlier, a variable being a spot in memory or a little bucket to hold values or a value, then it is also logical to think of variable or a bucket that will hold different kinds of things, if you will. Okay? So for instance, in programming, or because we're talking about computing here, things have to be very specific. Okay? Meaning, if I say that bucket A should hold elephants, that means bucket A needs to be able to hold an elephant, and usually only elephant. Meaning, if I try to put a 1 here, it will still work, because when I say var country, this country bucket here is nothing until we say what are we going to put in this country. Does it make sense? Okay, but before, obviously we had just string, Mozambique. That means the type now is string. So we have different kind of types. We have strings. We have number, which include integers and doubles. We'll see that in a minute. We have booleans. We'll see that also. We have lists, maps, and a few others. Okay, so those are types. So think of those as the types that can be contained or can be added to those variables. So a string is a type, which means implicitly is a string, because we are right away saying var country. We have no idea what it is until we set it to something. So if we set a variable to something, then that variable will have to contain this type. In this case, is a string. Same way, if we had put here a 1, now this variable holds what? An integer or a number. If it was 1.1, it would still hold true. Okay? So those are the distinctions that we have to think about as we learn any language, but specifically the Dart language. Okay, now there's another way in which we can actually create, as I was saying before, create variables that have a specific type, right? Those options, we can have that specific type in the beginning. That way we know exactly which types those variables can hold. The way we do this, now we don't use the var, because the var is just a generic variable. Now we have to append or prefix with the type. So if I want to make sure that a string, look at that, there's a string type, a string, and I have a name, that's the name of the variable. I can put a colon, semicolon like this. Now I know this variable is of type string, because I said this has to be string. Okay, so I've created a bucket which will hold strings. I know this will always hold string, because now I can go ahead and say name, and I can now set at a later time. This could be somewhere else at a later time. As you can see, this is the later time. Okay, is equal to Paulo. That works. So if I go ahead and just call name, guess what's going to happen? Paulo is going to show. Now, here's the thing. If I, because I said this is type this name is of type string, which means only holds strings. If I try to put a 1 here, what do you think is going to happen? We have some sort of issue. It says value of type int can't be assigned to a variable of type string. And my friends, there we go. You can see the distinction here. Because now we cannot put an elephant in a bucket that it was meant to put chickens or a chicken. In real life, that makes no sense. It's not going to work. That's what's happening here. Okay, so we have two ways of defining variables. If you say var and name of variable, you have to assign it right away. Because if you go ahead and get rid of this and go like that, that could work. Right? So this is direct assignment. We are saying var. It's a different type. It's just a generic type. And we say Mozambique. And now this country here is of type Mozambique. You could also, right, although probably not the best way to do this, you could just create a var called country. Right? And now this var called country is going to be very fluid and flexible, meaning it could be string, because at the bottom here I can go ahead and say country is equal to Japan. That works. I can say country is equal to 23. That also works, right? Why? Because we said var here. It's not very specific. We just say, let me get rid of this because that'd be confusing. Because we just said this var, it's just a variable. Now, at this point here of the code, var country is going to be a Japan, which means going to be a string type. But then it's going to be override. We're going to override it to 23, which is going to be an integer. If we say country here, you will see, because the way the nature programs work, they go from the top to bottom. And see, it was Japan, was a string, but then we override it to 23. Now you see 23 instead of Japan. Programs are actually, they run from top to bottom. So the last declaration is the one that's going to show. Therefore, there's 23. Okay, does it make sense? So those are small things that it's important to get situated to really understand how this works. This is more explicit. Explicit because we know exactly this always will be type string. Because we said it has to be a string. Therefore, we can't say name is equal to 45. That's not going to work. However, the var country, because it's a very generic fluid, as I said, we can put whatever we want. Okay? So those are the distinctions. And if you understand this, it shouldn't be too hard, then you will start understanding when and where to use one versus the other. Perfect. Play around with this concept, and I'll see you in the next video.